Dominic Castellano wasn't the kind of man you looked in the eye. He was the shadow looming over New York, the ghost haunting the machinery of the city's underworld. At 37, he ruled the Castellano empire with an iron fist, a man whose name made judges stutter and made rivals disappear without a trace. But his greatest weakness wasn't a rival gang or the FBI. It was his son, Luca, who was nearly 3 years old. The boy had never made a single sound. Doctors called it selective mutism caused by severe psychological trauma, but Dominic called it his personal hell. That silence stretched on for nearly 3 agonizing years, until a rainy Thursday night at La Fontana, when the most dangerous man in New York City froze in pure terror, because for the first time in his life, Luca spoke. He didn't call for his father. He pointed a trembling finger at a terrified waitress, a broken woman with hollow eyes and scars hidden beneath her sleeves, and screamed a single word, a word that would threaten to burn the entire Castellano empire to ashes. Mama. If this satisfies your soul, smash that like button and share this story with someone who needs it. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another tale, because some secrets are worth dying for, and this one is just beginning. The entire La Fontana restaurant sank into a deadly silence, silver plates frozen midair, glasses of red wine suspended at the lips of stunned diners, even the sound of rain striking the windows, swallowed whole by the impossible moment that had just occurred. Evelyn stood there as if her feet had been nailed to the marble floor, her whole body trembling beyond her control. She did not understand what was happening. She was only a waitress, a worn-down woman trying to scrape together enough money to pay off debts and survive one more day. And yet this child, the son of the most notorious Mafia boss in New York, had just called her mother. Evelyn, trembling from the pressure of serving such dangerous men, tried to calm her racing heart the only way she knew how. Unconsciously, barely above a whisper, she began to hum a soft, melancholic melody while pouring the wine. It was the same lullaby she had sung to her unborn child every night for 8 months, a song of sorrow and hope woven into her very soul. And then, the impossible happened. Before Luca even saw her face, the sound reached him. The moment the first familiar note drifted through the air, the boy in the high chair froze, his head tilting sharply toward the sound as if a locked door in his memory had suddenly swung open. It made no sense to anyone else, but the melody had unlocked a memory buried deep within the child's subconscious. Before Evelyn could even realize she had been humming, Dominic moved. He was fast like a panther, crossing the distance of the table in a blink, his hand clamping around her wrist like an iron vice. Evelyn screamed in pain, but the sound died in her throat when Dominic's eyes, black and bottomless, locked onto hers. "Who are you?" he said, his voice not a question but a verdict. "Who sent you here? Answer." Evelyn stammered, tears spilling from her eyes from pain and terror. "I do not know. Please, I swear I do not know. I am just a waitress. I have never met you or your son before." But her words passed Dominic like a useless breath of air. He did not hear them, did not want to hear them, because at that exact moment, Luca did something even more unthinkable. The boy, nearly 3 years old, who had never made a sound in his entire life, the child whom the world's top doctors had all given up on, suddenly cried. Luca's first cry shattered the air like cracking glass, raw with pain and despair. He thrashed in his high chair, tiny arms reaching toward Evelyn, his face flushed red as he screamed, "Mama! Mama, hold! Mama, hold me!" Dominic released Evelyn as if struck by lightning and turned to stare at his son, his face drained of all color, like a man who had just seen a ghost. 3 years, almost 3 years of praying, begging, paying millions of dollars to specialists, doctors, psychologists, all for the hope of hearing his child say one word, "Papa," and Luca had never spoken, not once, until now. And the first word he said was not Papa but Mama, spoken to a stranger. Dominic felt as if a blade had been driven straight through his chest. "Close the restaurant," he ordered, his voice glacial, cutting through Luca's cries. Bruno, the head of security, moved instantly. "No one leaves. Confiscate all phones. Anyone filming or taking photos, break their hands." Chaos erupted. Diners screamed and rushed toward the exits, only to be blocked by large men in black suits. Luigi, the restaurant manager, stood shaking behind the counter, too afraid to move. Evelyn wanted to run, to disappear, to wake up from this nightmare. But Luca kept crying, kept calling for her, and there was something in that sound that made her heart ache with a pain she could not explain, as if a piece of her soul were being torn apart. Dominic lifted Luca from the high chair and tried to calm him, but the boy fought wildly, pushing him away, his eyes never leaving Evelyn. No, no. Want mama, want mama. Evelyn's heart shattered at those words, and she did not know why, but tears were streaming down her face too. She wanted to hold the child, to soothe him, to tell him everything would be all right, but she could not, because Dominic Castellano was staring at her with the eyes of a man ready to kill. Evelyn had no time to react when two large men appeared at her sides, each gripping one of her arms and dragging her away as if she were a cheap doll. She struggled. She tried to scream for help, but no one in the restaurant dared to look at her. No one dared to speak, because everyone knew that standing against Dominic Castellano meant death. Luca's cries echoed behind her, the broken and desperate calls of Mama making Evelyn want to turn back, want to hold that child, even though she did not understand why she felt this pull so deeply, but she could not. She was shoved through the back door of the restaurant into a dark alley soaked with rain, where a sleek black SUV waited with its engine running. A black cloth was pulled over her eyes before she could see anything at all. The smell of expensive leather, cigar smoke, and danger filled the car. Evelyn trembled violently, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Please," she begged. "I did nothing wrong. I swear to God I do not know anything. Please let me go." "Silence," a curt voice snapped, and Evelyn immediately fell quiet. She felt the vehicle surge forward at a terrifying speed, taking sharp turns, racing down roads she could not imagine. She did not know where they were taking her. She only knew that tonight might be the last night of her life. 27 years of living, Evelyn had survived more hells than most people could imagine, and she had believed there was nothing left that could truly frighten her. But she was wrong. This fear was different. It was not the fear of being beaten, not the fear of hunger, but the fear of a small animal trapped in a cage with a predator, not knowing when it would strike, only knowing that it would. The car stopped after about 40 minutes, maybe less, maybe more. Time no longer existed for her. She was dragged out, her bare feet stepping onto cold, wet gravel, then into a warmer space scented with oak and lilies. This was not a warehouse or a torture basement like she had imagined. It smelled of wealth, of power, of a world she had never been allowed to touch. She was led through long corridors, up staircases, and finally pushed into a room. The door slammed shut, the lock clicked into place, and then there was absolute silence. Evelyn tore the blindfold away, took a deep breath, and looked around. The room was not as bad as she had feared. In fact, it was more beautiful than anywhere she had ever lived, with a large bed dressed in pristine white sheets, a red velvet armchair, a dark wooden table, and a wide window overlooking a garden swallowed by rain and darkness. But no matter how beautiful it was, this was still a prison. Evelyn rushed to the door, yanked the handle, pounded on it, screaming, "Open the door. Please open the door. I did nothing wrong. Let me out." No one answered, only the steady sound of rain tapping against the window, like a clock counting down to her death. Evelyn slid down onto the floor, her back against the heavy wooden door, and broke into sobs as painful memories crashed over her like a flood. She remembered the dark room at St. Margaret's orphanage where she was locked away whenever she disobeyed. She remembered Derek's basement, where he kept her for 3 days without food or water just because she dared to look into his eyes while he was drunk. She remembered the unfamiliar hospital room 3 years ago, where she woke up with an empty womb and a shattered heart. Evelyn hugged her knees, her body curling in on itself like a child. She had fought so hard to live. For 3 years, she had battled every day, every hour, every minute not to collapse. She had believed she was strong enough to face anything. But now, locked inside this room, inside the mansion of the most notorious Mafia boss in New York, Evelyn realized she was still that small, frightened, lonely girl she had always been, and tonight she might die without anyone knowing, without anyone remembering, without anyone mourning her. Evelyn never knew who her parents were. She was found in a trash bin behind a Brooklyn hospital when she was only a few days old, her umbilical cord not yet dry, her tiny body bluish from cold and hunger. People said she was lucky to survive, but Evelyn had never felt lucky. She was taken to St. Margaret's orphanage before she was a month old, and that place became her hell for the next 18 years. St. Margaret sat in a forgotten corner of Brooklyn, a grim red brick building with filthy windows and a playground that never echoed with laughter. On the surface, it was a church-run charity where kind nuns cared for unfortunate children, but behind those mold-stained walls existed a completely different world. Sister Catherine, who oversaw the children's wing, was a tall, gaunt woman, with eyes as cold as ice and hands faster than a whip. She believed abandoned children were the result of sin, and that the only way to save their souls was through iron discipline. Evelyn learned very early that crying earned beatings, speaking earned punishment, and looking an adult in the eyes was an unforgivable crime. She became a silent child, a faint shadow in the corner of the room, shrinking herself smaller and smaller so no one would notice her. But silence did not save her. The older children quickly realized Evelyn was easy prey. They pulled her hair, pinched her skin, shoved her head into toilets and flushed, stole her meager portions of food, tore apart the single old pillow she owned, and locked her in pitch-dark closets for hours. Evelyn never told the nuns, because she knew it would only make things worse. Once, foolishly, she told Sister Catherine about the bullying, and the woman slapped her to the floor, calling her a liar, a troublemaker, a bastard who did not know her place. But the beatings and bullying were not the worst part. The worst was Mr. Jenkins, the orphanage's night guard. He was a middle-aged man with a thick beard and breath that reeked of beer. He began coming into Evelyn's room when she was 8, at first only sitting on the edge of her bed watching her sleep, then letting his hands wander in ways she did not understand but instinctively knew were wrong. Evelyn learned to pretend to sleep deeply, learned to hold her breath and stay perfectly still, learned to separate her soul from her body so she would not feel what was happening. She told no one, because she knew no one would believe her, and if she spoke, she would be thrown out onto the streets, where her fate would be even worse. When Evelyn was 12, Mr. Jenkins suddenly disappeared. People said he had moved away, but Evelyn heard the nuns whispering about a scandal, about an investigation quietly buried, about money and power silencing everything. She never learned the truth, and she did not want to. She only wanted to forget, but memories never forget. They hide in nightmares, in panic that strikes in the middle of the night, in the way her body recoils whenever a man comes too close. At 18, Evelyn left St. Margaret's with a small bag holding a few worn clothes, $20 in assistance, and a soul shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She had no education, no skills, and no one in the world who cared whether she lived or died. New York City swallowed her the way it swallowed thousands of other orphans, and Evelyn began her fight for survival in a world with no place for the weak. She took any job she could find, washing dishes in restaurants, cleaning offices at night, handing out flyers on freezing streets. She slept in cheap motels, crawling with roaches and rats, sometimes in parks when she could not afford a room. She was cheated, robbed, and denied her wages so many times she lost count, and she thought life could not possibly get any worse, until she met Derek. Derek Morrison entered Evelyn's life like a savior when she met him while working as a server in a cheap bar in the Bronx. 22 years old, thin, exhausted, and desperate to her very bones, while Derek was 30, tall, ruggedly handsome, with a charming smile and honeyed words Evelyn had never heard from anyone before, telling her she was beautiful, telling her she deserved to be loved, telling her he would take care of her, protect her, give her a home she had never known. And Evelyn, an orphan raised in darkness, believed him because she was starving for love, weary of surviving alone, and too naive to see that predators always know how to disguise themselves as angels. They married after 6 months, a small ceremony at City Hall, with 2 hired strangers as witnesses for $20. Evelyn in a white dress from a thrift store, holding a fake flower, believing it was the happiest day of her life. And she was wrong. Derek's true face revealed itself on their wedding night when he was drunk and slapped her onto the bed because she asked him to be gentler. The first slap but not the last, followed by punches, kicks, being dragged across the floor by her hair, nights locked in the basement to think about her mistakes, because Derek never needed a reason to hurt her. Food too cold meant a beating. The house not clean enough meant a beating. Looking at him the wrong way meant a beating, or simply that he was drunk and needed somewhere to unload his rage, and Evelyn was the perfect punching bag. She tried to escape 3 times. The first time Derek found her in a shelter for abused women and dragged her back by the hair in front of everyone, while no one dared intervene. The second time she ran to the police station, only to discover Derek had friends on the force who called him immediately. The third time she nearly died when he beat her until 3 ribs were broken and her head severely injured. And after that she stopped running, accepting her fate, accepting that this was her life, accepting that she would die in that filthy apartment at the hands of her violent husband until she discovered she was pregnant. Evelyn learned the truth while vomiting in the bathroom after a beating. 24 years old, bruised from head to toe and utterly hopeless. buying a pregnancy test with loose coins hidden under the bed, and when 2 red lines appeared, she cried, from fear, from not knowing what to do, but also because for the first time in her life, she felt she was not alone, because a small life was growing inside her, a part of her, someone who would love her unconditionally. She hid the pregnancy from Derek for the first 4 months, wearing loose clothes, binding her belly, praying every night he would not notice. But when her body could no longer hide it, she was forced to tell him, and his reaction was unexpected. Because he did not hit her, he smiled, a strange smile she did not understand, and said the baby would change everything. In the months that followed, Derek barely touched her, still drinking, still getting drunk, but no longer beating her as before, and Evelyn did not know why, and did not dare ask. She was only grateful for the peace and poured all her strength into caring for the child inside her, singing lullabies every night, telling stories, promising she would protect the baby at any cost, that it would have a better life than hers. The fateful night came when Evelyn was 8 months pregnant. Derek passed out drunk on the sofa as usual, and as Evelyn was preparing for bed, she heard the sound of breaking glass, and before she could scream, a hand clamped over her mouth. A needle pierced her neck, and the world dissolved into darkness. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness, being her hands wrapped around her swollen belly to protect her unborn child, and a cold voice whispering in her ear to be careful with the belly, because they needed the baby and did not need the mother. Evelyn woke in a room stripped of all color, the sharp smell of antiseptic burning her nose, harsh neon lights stabbing her eyes until she could barely open them, and she tried to move only to find her body screaming in pain, as if every cell were being torn apart, and then she realized it. Her belly. Her belly was flat, her trembling hand sliding down to her lower abdomen, touching bandages soaked through, and a scream ripped from her throat and filled the room as she cried out, "No, no, my baby, where is my baby?" And a man in a white coat entered, his face cold and empty of emotion, speaking in a flat voice as if reading a weather report, telling her she had gone into premature labor, that the baby had not survived, that they had done everything they could but could not save it, and Evelyn howled, demanding to see her child, demanding to know if it was a boy or a girl, demanding to hold that tiny body even once. But the man only shook his head and said there was no body. The baby had been too small and had been handled according to medical procedure. There was no birth certificate, no death certificate, nothing to prove the child had ever existed, except the long scar across her abdomen and the black hollow in her chest where her heart had once beaten. Evelyn did not know how long she stayed in that hospital, days or weeks. Time no longer had meaning. She lay motionless on the bed, not eating, not drinking, not speaking, staring at the white ceiling, wanting to die, wanting to follow her child wherever it had gone. And when she was finally strong enough to be discharged, they handed her a massive hospital bill and pushed her out onto the streets of New Jersey, a city she did not know, penniless and lost. And she wandered for 3 days before a church fed her and helped call Derek's address. But when she returned to the Bronx apartment, the police told her Derek had died 2 weeks earlier in a car accident, drunk behind the wheel, crashing into a utility pole and dying instantly. And Evelyn stood there amid broken bottles and the stench of damp rot, unsure whether she should cry or laugh, because the man who had tortured her for 2 years was gone. Yet she felt no relief. She felt nothing at all, hollow like an empty shell cast onto shore. 2 weeks later, Evelyn slit her wrists in the apartment bathroom, blood flooding the tub, warm and freeing, and she thought she would finally see her child again. But neighbors heard the crash, broke down the door, called for help, and she was saved. 4 months later, she swallowed a bottle of sleeping pills in a cheap room in Queens, and the landlord found her foaming at the mouth but still breathing, and again she was saved. After the second attempt, Evelyn was committed to a psychiatric facility for 6 months, where she met Dr. Margaret Chen, a small woman with warm eyes and endless patience, who did not tell her to be strong, did not say time healed all wounds or that she still had her whole life ahead of her, but simply sat and listened as Evelyn cried, listened as she spoke of the child she never got to see, and said only one thing, that she was allowed to hurt, she was allowed to grieve, and when she was ready, she was allowed to live on for her child. It took Evelyn nearly 2 years to learn how to keep living, years of therapy, years of antidepressants, and endless low-paying jobs to pay off hospital debt and rent, and she moved into a rundown apartment in the Bronx, accepted work as a waitress, and fought every day not to collapse, never happy and never believing she would be happy again, but alive, living because somewhere she believed her child's soul was watching her and she did not want it to see its mother fall. Every night before sleep, Evelyn still sang the lullaby she had sung to her pregnant belly for 8 months, singing into the empty air, singing to a child who did not exist, her pillow soaked with tears, not knowing that the child was still alive, not knowing that every night hundreds of miles away in a lavish mansion on Long Island, a boy of nearly 3 years also could not sleep, also cried in silence, also searched for someone he did not know yet, whose absence his soul remembered down to the bone. While Evelyn lay curled up inside the locked room, her mind being torn apart by painful memories, Dominic Castellano sat in his ground-floor study of the mansion, eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness, and a 4th glass of whiskey clenched in his hand, having called Marco, the head of the family's intelligence division, the moment he returned home and ordered an immediate high-priority investigation into Evelyn Harper, because Marco was the best in the business, a former FBI agent bought off 10 years earlier, a man capable of digging up any secret no matter how deeply buried, and within hours the results began to arrive. Evelyn Harper, 27 years old, parents unknown, found in a trash bin in Brooklyn and raised at St. Margaret's Orphanage. No criminal record, no ties to any criminal organization, no indication of espionage or assassination, just an ordinary woman, so poor her bank account held only $43, burdened with medical debt exceeding $80,000, renting a rundown apartment in the Bronx for $400 a month. And Dominic frowned as he read this, because such massive medical debt did not make sense. A waitress without health insurance did not simply accumulate that kind of debt unless she had undergone major surgery or been hospitalized for an extended period. So he ordered Marco to dig deeper, and what Marco uncovered made Dominic set the whiskey glass down, his hand trembling uncontrollably, because 3 years earlier Evelyn Harper, 24 years old, had been 8 months pregnant when she suddenly vanished from her Bronx apartment, and 2 weeks later she appeared at a public hospital in Newark, New Jersey, having just undergone an emergency cesarean section, her wound barely healed and showing signs of severe infection likely dumped there by captors who believed she would bleed to death before the night was over, with medical records stating she had been transferred from a private clinic called Meadow Creek Medical Center in the suburbs of Trenton, New Jersey. And the baby was reported dead. Meadow Creek Medical Center. Dominic read the name again and again, his heart pounding, because he knew it. He knew it very well, since almost 3 years earlier his wife Natalia had given birth to Luca at a high-end private clinic in Geneva, Switzerland, operated by the same medical conglomerate that owned Meadow Creek Medical Center. And Dominic remembered the night Luca was born as if it were yesterday, because he had not been there. Natalia had spent the entire pregnancy claiming hers was a high-risk case, moving into a separate wing of the mansion and refusing to let him touch her or see her body, citing doctors' strict orders for isolation. She had then insisted on giving birth in Switzerland, saying the doctors were better, that she wanted privacy, so he agreed to let her go alone with her Uncle Vincent, the man Natalia trusted above all others. And when Dominic flew to Geneva the following day, Natalia lay pale but smiling in her hospital bed, Luca sleeping in the crib beside her, the doctors saying it had been a difficult but successful birth and that both mother and child were healthy. And a week later they returned to New York, and 2 months after that Natalia died in a car accident on the Long Island Expressway, the vehicle losing control and plunging into a ravine late at night, leaving Dominic shattered as he buried his wife in the family cemetery, held his newborn son in his arms, and swore to protect him at any cost, never once suspecting anything, until now. Dominic stared again at the files Marco had sent, his mind spinning, because a woman who lost a child 3 years ago at a clinic linked to the one where Natalia gave birth to Luca. At the same time, and tonight his silent son had suddenly called that woman mother, and it could not be, it was impossible. Yet Dominic Castellano was a man who believed in truth, not coincidence. So he picked up the phone and called the family's private physician, telling him he needed an urgent DNA test. Samples taken from Luca and from the woman being held in the second-floor guest room, results within 24 hours, and if he discovered that anyone leaked this information, he would cut out their tongue. 22 hours later, the Castellano family physician knocked on the door of Dominic's study, a white envelope in his hand, and a face drained of color like someone who had just seen a ghost, while Dominic had not slept for a single moment during the wait. Sitting in the dark room, lit only by a desk lamp casting shadows over the oak-paneled walls, draining one bottle of whiskey after another, his eyes fixed on the photograph of Luca on his desk, the son he loved more than his own life, the child he had spent 3 agonizing years desperately trying to cure. the boy he believed was the last blood tie he had left after Natalia's death. The doctor placed the envelope on the desk, bowed his head, and left quickly as if fleeing from an imminent explosion. Dominic stared at the envelope as though it were a venomous snake, his hand trembling as he picked it up, trembling even more as he opened it, and then going completely still as he read the bold line printed on the paper inside. The DNA test results indicate a biological mother-son relationship between subject A, Evelyn Harper, and subject B, Luca Castellano, with a 99.99% probability. Dominic read the line again and again, 5 times, 10 times, 20 times, as if searching for an error, a mistake, anything that could explain this as a cruel joke played by fate, but there was no error and no mistake, only a cold and brutal truth staring him in the face. Evelyn Harper was Luca's biological mother. Luca was not Natalia's child. Luca was the baby stolen from the womb of a poor young woman 3 years ago, and that meant Natalia, the wife Dominic had mourned for nearly 3 years, the woman he had laid to rest in the family cemetery with reverence and grief, was not a victim, she was the perpetrator. Dominic stood up, his legs unsteady like a drunk man, even though he had never been more clear-headed in his life, and walked to the wedding photograph hanging on the wall, the image of him and Natalia on their wedding day 6 years earlier, her dressed in pure white with a flawless smile. And he looked into her blue eyes in the picture, and for the first time realized that what he had once believed was sweetness had been deception, what he had once believed was love had been a perfectly staged performance. Dominic tore the photograph from the wall and smashed it onto the floor, glass exploding outward, the wooden frame splitting in two. But he did not stop, continuing to strike, to kick, to grind the image beneath his feet, as if crushing 3 years of false memories. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the late night, yet no guard dared to open the door, because they knew that when Dominic Castellano was consumed by rage, the safest place was far away. When the fury finally ebbed, Dominic collapsed onto the floor amid the broken glass, his head bowed, his shoulders shaking in silent waves. He did not cry. Dominic Castellano had not cried since his mother died 20 years earlier, but tonight, in the dark room with fragments of the past scattered around him, he felt something break apart inside his chest, not his heart, because his heart had hardened long ago, but his faith in the woman he had sworn to love for life, his faith in a marriage he believed was real, his faith in himself, that he was smart enough and powerful enough never to be deceived, and tonight, every one of those beliefs died. The door of the locked room opened at 3 a.m, and Evelyn jolted awake from a restless nightmare. Unsure how long she had slept because she had collapsed on the floor beside the door, too weak to climb onto the bed, with memories of her lost child chasing her even into her dreams, and the hallway light spilled in, forcing her to squint, and when her vision adjusted, she saw Dominic Castellano standing in the doorway, but this was not the Dominic she had seen at the restaurant, because the man before her looked as if he had come out of a war, his suit gone, his white shirt wrinkled and stained with dark marks that could have been blood or wine, his hair disheveled, and his black eyes bloodshot with fine red veins, looking exhausted, shattered, and at least 10 years older than he had only hours earlier. And Evelyn backed away until her spine hit the wall, her heart pounding wildly, certain this was the moment she would die, certain he had finished his interrogations and had come to end her life. Yet Dominic did not advance. He remained in the doorway, studying her face for a long moment, as if trying to read something written there, then slowly walked in and sat down in the armchair across from her, holding a white sheet of paper in his hand, and he asked her for her full name in a hoarse voice, stripped of threat and filled only with exhaustion, and she answered Evelyn Harper with a trembling voice, and he asked what year she was born, and she said 1997, and then he asked if she had ever been pregnant, and the question stabbed through her chest like a blade, stealing her breath as tears spilled despite her effort not to cry in front of an enemy, asking why he would ask that. And he told her to answer him, staring with eyes like black pits ringed with red, repeating the question. And she whispered that she had, 3 years ago, that she had been 8 months pregnant, that she had been kidnapped and sedated, and when she woke her child was gone, that they told her the baby had died, that they never let her see the child or gave her anything at all, and she broke down sobbing as the words poured out like a broken dam, saying she had lived in hell for 3 years, that she had tried to kill herself twice because the pain of losing her child was unbearable, that she did not know who he was, did not know why his son had called her mother, and she swore to God she knew nothing, begging him that if he was going to kill her then he should do it because she had nothing left to live for. and Dominic was silent for a long time. Then he stood, walked toward her, and knelt in front of her, freezing Evelyn in shock because the most notorious mafia boss in New York was kneeling before a poor waitress, something that made no sense at all, and he told her to read, handing her the paper in a voice low and restrained as if holding back a storm, and Evelyn took it with shaking hands, squinting in the weak hallway light to read the bold lines, stating the DNA test results, identifying Subject A as Evelyn Harper and Subject B as Luca Castellano, with a biological mother-son relationship at 99.99% accuracy, and the paper slipped from her fingers as she stared at Dominic with wide eyes and an open mouth, unable to speak, whispering that it was impossible because her child had died and that was what they had told her, and Dominic answered with a voice hard as steel that they had lied, that his wife could not have children, that she and his uncle had stolen Evelyn's baby, taken him to Switzerland, and passed him off as her own, that Luca was Evelyn's son, that her child was alive and in this house, and the world spun as Evelyn felt herself falling with nothing to hold on to, because the son she had mourned for 3 years, the child she had sung to every night knowing he could not hear, the child she had twice tried to die to reunite with, was alive, here, and had called her mother, and she begged in a broken whisper to see her son, and Dominic looked at her, his face still cold, but his eyes no longer hostile, nodded, stood, and opened the door, where a guard waited in the hallway holding Luca, the boy drowsy on the guard's shoulder until the door opened, and he stirred as if sensing something, his brown eyes locking onto Evelyn as he began to struggle and reach for her, calling Mama in a hoarse voice raw from hours of crying, and Evelyn rushed forward, pulled him from the guard's arms, and held him tight, as if afraid he would disappear, while Luca wrapped his arms around her neck, buried his face in her shoulder, and cried, the cry of a nearly 3-year-old child who had never spoken or cried in his life, and had finally found the person his soul had been searching for. And Evelyn sobbed, calling him her son, telling him she was here, apologizing for not finding him sooner, while Dominic stood in the doorway watching the reunion, a man who had seen blood, death, betrayal, and the cruelty of the underworld, yet had never seen anything like this, pure love, a mother's instinct, an invisible bond binding 2 souls torn apart for 3 years, and he understood that no matter what came next, he could never take Luca away from this woman. Evelyn held Luca through the entire night, afraid to loosen her arms, afraid to close her eyes, terrified that if she slept she would wake to find everything nothing more than a dream, and the boy refused to leave her as well, his small arms wrapped tightly around her neck, whispering Mama from time to time, as if reminding himself that his mother was truly here. And when dawn finally slipped through the narrow gap in the curtains, the door opened, and Dominic stepped inside, freshly showered and changed, yet with eyes still bloodshot and a face carved deep with the exhaustion of a sleepless night, standing in the doorway as he took in the sight of Evelyn sitting on the floor with Luca asleep in her arms, something flickering briefly in his gaze that might have been jealousy, or pain, or both, and he said they needed to talk, about the future, and how to handle what came next. And Evelyn lifted her head, her protective instinct tightening her hold on Luca as she demanded to know what he planned to do and whether he intended to take her child. And Dominic shook his head, entering the room and sitting in the armchair, telling her that if he had wanted to take the boy he would have done so long ago without needing her consent. But that was not what he wanted, and when Evelyn asked what he did want, he paused before explaining that Vincent Castellano, his uncle, was the one behind the plot to steal her baby, the man who arranged the kidnapping, contacted the clinic, and helped Natalia stage everything, and that Dominic believed Vincent had also killed Natalia to erase loose ends, sending a chill down Evelyn's spine as she asked why, and Dominic answered bitterly that it was about power, because Luca was the sole heir to the Castellano empire, and whoever controlled Luca would control everything, Natalia having been nothing more than a pawn, discarded once she was no longer useful. And Evelyn understood then why she had been taken, why her child had been stolen, why she had lived in hell for 3 years, all because of a war for power she had never known existed, because she had been an expendable target, a poor woman no one would miss, perfect for having her child taken. And she said that he wanted revenge, not as a question, and Dominic corrected her by calling it justice, though his eyes said the two were the same to him, adding that he needed her help, which made Evelyn ask with open sarcasm how she could possibly help the most powerful mafia boss in New York. And Dominic explained that Vincent did not yet know the truth had been uncovered, believing the secret buried with Natalia, and that if Dominic acted immediately, Vincent would flee or strike back, dragging the city into a long war that would kill many, including innocents. So he needed to draw Vincent out, force him into the open, make him make a mistake. And when Evelyn asked how Dominic told her it would be, by having her appear at his side as his new lover, which made Evelyn think she had misheard, as she protested that she was just a waitress who knew nothing of his world and could not do this, only for Dominic to cut her off and tell her that she could, that she was stronger than she believed, having survived 18 years in an orphanage, 2 years with a violent husband, and 3 years of grief over a lost child, having endured without breaking, a strength few possessed. And Evelyn fell silent, knowing the proposal was insane, dangerous, and might cost her life. Yet when she looked down at Luca sleeping in her arms with his angelic face and steady breath, she knew her answer, and asked only whether she would be allowed to stay with Luca. And Dominic nodded, promising every day, promising she would live in the mansion in a room beside the child, have everything she needed, and that when it was over they would figure out the rest. Admitting when pressed that he did not yet know what that meant, because he had raised Luca for nearly 3 years, and loved him as his own, even if they were not blood, while Evelyn was the child's true mother, and he neither could nor wanted to separate them, meaning they would have to learn how to coexist at least until Vincent was dealt with. And Evelyn studied Dominic, unable to read the stone mask of his face, knowing she had no reason to trust a Mafia boss, yet trusting one thing only, that he loved Luca, and anyone who loved her child was someone she could work with, so she agreed without her voice shaking, but added one condition. And when Dominic waited, she told him that if he ever hurt Luca, even a single hair, she would kill him regardless of how many guards or guns he had, because she would find a way. And Dominic looked at her for a long moment before the corner of his mouth curved into something almost like a smile, as he said he believed she would. And that was exactly why he had chosen her. Evelyn's life changed completely in the span of a single night. From a crumbling apartment in the Bronx where roaches crawled along the walls and the smell of dampness never faded, into a world of luxury she had only ever seen on a screen. The room Dominic assigned to her located right beside Luca's, 3 times larger than her old apartment, with a king-size bed dressed in white silk sheets, a private marble bathroom, and a walk-in closet larger than the storage building at St. Margaret's Orphanage had ever been. And a team of staff arrived carrying new clothes, shoes, cosmetics, everything she might need, and many things she had never imagined needing, yet none of that mattered to Evelyn, because there was only one thing that mattered to her: Luca. The boy clung to her like a shadow, refusing to eat unless she sat beside him, refusing to sleep unless she lay next to him, refusing to let anyone else touch him if she was not within sight. 3 years of silence, 3 years of loneliness in a room full of expensive toys but no warmth. Almost 3 years of searching for something he did not understand. And now that he had found it, he would not let go. The most miraculous thing of all was that Luca began to speak, not much and not clearly, but a little more each day. Mama hungry, mama play, mama sing, simple 2 or 3 word phrases that would have been ordinary for any other child, but were miracles for Luca, and the doctors who examined him could not believe what they were seeing, calling it a miraculous recovery, a case unheard of in medical literature, never realizing that the miracle was simply a mother's love, an invisible bond reconnecting 2 souls that had been torn apart for too long. Evelyn spent every moment with Luca, reading to him, singing the lullabies she had sung to her pregnant belly 3 years earlier, teaching him the names of objects, playing with him in the vast gardens of the estate, needing no beautiful clothes or expensive jewelry, only the sight of her son's smile, the sound of him calling her mother, the feel of holding him every night and knowing he was safe. Dominic watched it all from a distance, never interfering with Evelyn and Luca's time together, never demanding anything from her beyond preparing for the role she would soon have to play. Yet Evelyn knew he was watching, often catching his silhouette at the end of the hallway when she walked Luca through the house, or seeing him seated in his study with the door slightly open while she and Luca played in the living room, never speaking, only watching, and in those dark eyes was a tangle of emotions she could not decipher, perhaps jealousy because Luca had never clung to him that way despite nearly 3 years of care, perhaps pain because the truth about Natalia was still a wound that had not healed, perhaps relief because Luca had finally found someone who could reach his heart, or perhaps all of it at once. One evening, as Evelyn sang Luca to sleep, she heard footsteps stop outside the door and knew it was Dominic, standing there through the entire song, not entering, not knocking, only listening, and when the song ended and Luca drifted into sleep, she heard the footsteps retreat. She did not call out to him or ask what he wanted, because she understood that Dominic was grieving too, in his own way. Grieving the wife he had once loved, even though that love had been built on lies. Grieving the child he believed was his, even though he now knew Luca was not his blood. And grieving the faith he had lost in himself, in his ability to see truth and read the people around him. Evelyn did not pity Dominic, because he was a mafia boss with blood on his hands, and did not deserve pity, but she began to understand him, and perhaps in this mad and dangerous world, understanding was the first step toward trust. That night Evelyn could not sleep, even though Luca had fallen into a deep sleep from 9 o'clock after she sang him 3 lullabies in a row, her mind spinning with thoughts that had no beginning and no end, and she slipped into the silk robe the staff had left in her wardrobe, stepped out of the room, and walked down the dark hallway, without knowing what she was searching for, as the Castellano mansion at night felt like a labyrinth of shadow and silence. Expensive oil paintings lining the walls, watching her like restless ghosts, her footsteps echoing on the oak floors like drums in the emptiness, until she passed the living room, the library, the vast dining hall, and finally stopped before the glass doors leading to the terrace, moonlight spilling through the glass to reveal a lone figure standing outside, Dominic leaning against the railing with a half-finished glass of whiskey in his hand, eyes fixed on the dark sea stretching beyond, not turning when Evelyn stepped out, yet clearly aware of her presence, asking if she could not sleep in a low voice roughened by alcohol, and she answered no while standing a few steps away and asked about him, and he replied that he rarely slept, that it had been 10 years since he slept more than 4 hours a night, and they stood in silence for a long time with only the distant sound of waves crashing against the cliffs and the night wind moving through the trees. Evelyn, glancing at Dominic from the corner of her eye, and realizing that under the moonlight, when no one was watching, he looked more exhausted and lonely than she had ever seen him, the scar on his eyebrow stark in the silver light, making her wonder about the story behind it, and she asked if he missed Natalia, immediately regretting the question. Yet Dominic did not grow angry, only letting out a hollow laugh without joy, saying he did not know anymore, that he once thought he loved her but now realized he had never truly known her, that he loved someone who did not exist, a perfectly staged performance. And when Evelyn asked if it hurt, he turned to her, dark eyes glinting under the moon, asking what she thought, and she answered honestly that she did not know, that she had never been loved enough to know what betrayal felt like. And the words silenced him as he looked at her for a long moment as if seeing her for the first time, then asked her to tell him about her life. Why he wanted to know, she asked. And he said because they would have to play lovers before the world, and because he was curious, because she had survived things that should have killed most people, and he wanted to know how she had done it, and she did not know why, but she began to speak, perhaps because the night was too quiet, the moon too bright, and for the first time in her life someone truly wanted to listen. So she told him about St. Margaret's, about the beatings and the nights locked in pitch-dark closets, about Mr. Jenkins and the hands in the dark she had tried to forget for so many years, about Derek, and the fists, and the false apologies, about the swollen belly she protected at all costs, and about the night she was kidnapped, the white hospital room, and the 3 years of hell that followed. And Dominic listened without a single word, offering no pity and no empty comfort, only watching her with unbroken focus. And somehow that silence was more comforting than any words could have been, and when she finished, Evelyn realized her face was soaked with tears, without knowing when she had started crying, turning away in shame for showing weakness before this man. Yet Dominic handed her a handkerchief from his jacket pocket, white silk embroidered with the initials DC in the corner, and said quietly that now it was his turn, that she had told him her story, so he would tell her his. And he spoke of a childhood spent under the shadow of a ruthless father, of beatings whenever he failed to meet impossible standards, of a gentle mother who died of cancer when he was 17, the only woman who ever loved him unconditionally, of becoming a mafia boss not by choice but by destiny, because that was the fate of a Castellano, of loneliness amid crowds where everyone feared him yet no one truly knew him, of Luca and the pain of watching his son remain silent for nearly 3 years, of the helplessness of being unable to reach the heart of the child he loved more than his own life. And when his story ended, the sky was already close to dawn, the two of them still standing there as shadows beneath the fading moon. And somehow the distance between them had narrowed, not because they had fallen in love, but because they had come to understand one another, and in a world built on secrets and lies, understanding could sometimes be more precious than love itself. 2 weeks after the night they spoke on the terrace, Evelyn stood before the mirror in the dressing room, and did not recognize the woman staring back at her, the wine-red dress clinging to her body, slit high to mid-thigh, daringly backless yet still elegant. Her hair swept up to reveal the long line of her neck, adorned with the ruby necklace Dominic had handed her that morning without a word. Her face professionally made up to hide the shadows of sleepless nights and the invisible scars of the past. Looking every bit a woman of high society, a woman worthy of standing beside the most powerful mafia boss in New York, and yet inside she was still the trembling orphan girl from St. Margaret's, her heart pounding wildly as if it might break free from her chest. "Are you ready?" Dominic's voice came from behind her, and she turned to see him standing in the doorway, the perfectly tailored black tuxedo, emphasizing his height and broad shoulders, looking like a dark king, powerful and dangerous, though those deep black eyes held something close to concern. "No," Evelyn answered honestly, "but I will be." Dominic nodded, stepped forward, and offered his hand, and Evelyn placed her hand in his, as they left the room like a real couple. The gala was held at a Long Island estate, hosted by Vincent Castellano to celebrate the 70th birthday of Don Caruso, a long-standing ally of the family, the most important event of the year for New York's mafia world, where bosses and their men gathered beneath the veneer of an elegant social affair, and it was also the first time Evelyn appeared in public as Dominic's lover. When the black Rolls-Royce stopped at the gates and Dominic led Evelyn out, she felt hundreds of eyes turn toward them, whispers rippling through the crowd like water. "Who is she? Dominic has a new woman. So soon. Natalia has been dead for nearly 3 years." And Evelyn kept her chin high, her back straight, wearing the perfect smile she had practiced before the mirror for an entire week, clinging to Dominic's arm like a lifeline, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fabric of his suit and finding a small measure of calm there. "Relax," Dominic murmured at her ear, his warm breath brushing her skin. "You are doing beautifully." They moved through the crowd as Dominic introduced her to each person. "This is Evelyn Harper, the special woman in my life." He said it again and again, and each time his eyes rested on her with a tenderness that was flawlessly convincing, or perhaps not entirely false. Evelyn could no longer be sure. Then Vincent Castellano appeared, 62 years old, white-haired, deeply lined, with steel-gray eyes sharp as razors, dressed in a 3-piece gray suit, his smile warm while every movement radiated cold calculation. This was the man who stole her child, the man who gave her 3 years of hell, and she had to stand here smiling at him as if nothing had happened. "Dominic, my beloved nephew." Vincent spread his arms as if to embrace him, but Dominic only shook his hand, maintaining a polite distance. "And who is this?" Vincent asked. "Evelyn Harper," Dominic replied evenly. "My lover." Vincent turned to Evelyn, his gray eyes sweeping over her from head to toe like a man appraising merchandise, nausea rising in her throat, though she kept smiling. "How unexpected," Vincent said, his voice honeyed with poison. "I did not know Dominic was seeing anyone." "Where did you appear from, young lady?" "We met at the cemetery," Evelyn answered calmly, though her heart was pounding like a drum. "I was visiting my father's grave. Dominic was visiting Natalia's. We began talking about loss, about pain, about how grief is simply love, with nowhere left to go. It was not love at first sight, Mr. Castellano. Just understanding between 2 broken souls." Vincent lifted a brow, clearly not expecting such an answer. "How poetic. And Luca, that difficult boy, has he accepted you?" A flash of anger sparked in Evelyn's eyes before she forced it down. "Luca is not difficult," she said, her voice hardening slightly. "He was only waiting for the right person to listen, and he speaks with me a great deal. In fact, he has a very good memory for faces and voices of those who visit the house." Vincent paled for the briefest moment, enough for Evelyn to notice, because if Luca had heard conversations between Vincent and Natalia years ago, if the boy was not merely a silent, harmless child but a potential witness. "Is that so?" Vincent forced a smile, swirling his wine. "Welcome to the family, young lady, though I should warn you that Castellano women tend to die young." "I am not a Castellano woman," Evelyn replied with a sweet smile that did not reach her eyes. "And I have very strong survival instincts. I am from Queens." Dominic let out a sudden, short, sharp laugh, slipped an arm around Evelyn's waist, pulling her close. "Come, my love, the music has started," and he led her onto the dance floor, leaving Vincent standing there with his glass and his calculating gaze. "You were brilliant," Dominic whispered as they began to dance, his hand warm and steady against her bare back. "A cemetery, you are a natural actress." "I do not act when it comes to pain," Evelyn replied, glancing over his shoulder to see Vincent making a phone call in the corner, his face tense. "He is afraid now. Dominic, I saw it in his eyes." "Good," Dominic answered, spinning her once as the red dress flared like a petal. "He should be afraid, because when I make my enemies afraid, that is when they make mistakes." Vincent Castellano left the party early with a strained smile and an apology about a sudden headache, but in truth his mind was spinning with suspicions he could not silence, because there was something wrong about that woman, Evelyn Harper, in the way she looked at him, the coldness hidden behind her sweet smile, the way she spoke of Luca with the fierce protectiveness of a lioness guarding her cub, and that remark about Luca having a good memory, which felt less like casual conversation and more like a warning or a threat. Vincent did not sleep that night. He sat in his Manhattan penthouse office, draining one bottle of scotch after another, and called Tony Russo, the man who had handled his dirtiest work for 20 years, ordering him in a hoarse voice thick with alcohol and tension to find out everything about Evelyn Harper, where she came from, what she did, when she met Dominic, and most importantly why the boy Luca had suddenly begun to speak after her appearance. Tony worked quickly and efficiently as always, and 2 days later he laid a thick file on Vincent's desk, his face unusually pale. Vincent read, and the blood in his veins seemed to freeze. Evelyn Harper, 27 years old, orphaned from infancy, raised at St. Margaret's Orphanage in Brooklyn, formerly married to Derek Morrison, deceased in a car accident, and most crucially, 3 years earlier she had been 8 months pregnant when she was kidnapped, and then found 2 weeks later at a hospital in Newark, New Jersey, bearing the scar of a cesarean section and with a child reported dead, having been transferred there from Meadow Creek Medical Center. Vincent read the name again and again, his hand trembling uncontrollably. Meadow Creek, the clinic he had used to carry out the baby switch 3 years ago, the clinic he believed he had erased completely by having it burned to the ground 2 years earlier after Natalia's death, and yet something had slipped through the net, or someone had. Vincent hurled the file onto the desk and began pacing the room like a caged animal, because everything was now clear. Evelyn Harper was not a Sluchai lover who had wandered into Dominic's life. She was Luca's biological mother, the woman he had ordered, kidnapped, and robbed of her child 3 years earlier, and if she was now at Dominic's side, it meant Dominic knew the truth. Then why had Dominic not acted? Vincent wondered. Why had his nephew not stormed in and killed him the moment he learned that Vincent had stolen the child of an innocent woman and orchestrated everything with Natalia? The answer came within seconds. Evidence. Dominic was gathering evidence, drawing him out, waiting for him to make a mistake. Vincent let out a short laugh without humor, because Dominic thought himself clever, but he had underestimated his uncle. Vincent had survived 40 years in the underworld by always striking first, by eliminating threats before they could grow, and he would do the same now. "Eliminate the girl, Evelyn," he ordered Tony, his voice cold as ice. "Make it look like an accident, and if possible make the boy Luca disappear as well, because without an heir there would be no one left to control the Castellano empire but him." Tony hesitated, because killing the boss's child, even one not of blood, was unheard of within Mafia rules, but when he looked into Vincent's unhinged eyes he understood that this man had crossed every boundary long ago, so he nodded and left to prepare. Vincent returned to the window, staring out at the glittering lights of New York below, knowing he had waited too long to seize control of the Castellano empire, and he would not allow a poor waitress and a 2-year-old child to destroy everything he had built, no matter how many people he had to kill, no matter the cost to his own soul. 3 days after the party, on a rare sunlit autumn afternoon in New York, Evelyn decided to take Luca out to the garden behind the mansion to play, the boy having made remarkable progress in recent weeks, speaking in longer phrases, laughing more often, and especially loving to run across the lush green lawn overlooking the sea, while Dominic was in a meeting with his associates in the study and had, as usual, assigned Bruno and 2 other guards to stay close to Evelyn and Luca, security having been tightened since the party as Dominic waited for a move from Vincent, though Evelyn did not think it would come so quickly, and as Luca chased a yellow butterfly, his clear laughter ringing through the air, Evelyn stood a few steps away, smiling at her son, wanting to carve this moment into her memory, because it was the most peaceful she had known since entering the Castellano estate, not knowing that 400 meters away, on the roof of an abandoned building outside the grounds, a sniper was adjusting his scope, one of the best money could buy, hired by Vincent for $200,000, with a primary target of Evelyn and a secondary target of the child, clean and without a trace, and the first bullet tore through the air faster than sound. Evelyn, hearing no gunshot, only the explosive spray of dirt beside her foot less than half a meter from Luca's head, and in that instant time seemed to stop as a mother's instinct, the most primal instinct that needs no learning, ignited inside her like fire. She did not think, she acted, sprinting toward Luca with a speed she did not know she possessed, grabbing him, crushing him to her chest and rolling to the ground, just as the second bullet sliced through the space where her head had been. "Mama!" Luca screamed in terror, not understanding what was happening. "Stay down," Evelyn shouted, covering him completely with her body, face pressed to the grass, back turned toward the gunfire, knowing that if the next bullet struck, it would strike her, and not Luca, that she would die to protect her child, that she was ready to die to protect him, while Bruno and the guards reacted instantly, one throwing himself over Evelyn and Luca like living armor as the other two drew their weapons and fired toward the abandoned building, gunshots erupting into chaos, as Evelyn held Luca tight and whispered into his ear that Mama was here. Mama would protect him, everything would be all right, and 5 minutes later, the gunfire ceased, Bruno calling out that it was safe before Evelyn dared lift her head to find Luca sobbing in her arms but unharmed, Evelyn herself uninjured, save for scrapes on her elbows and knees from hitting the ground, their survival a fragile, breath-stealing miracle, and Dominic arrived within 3 minutes. And Evelyn had never seen him like this, his face ashen as death, his dark eyes burning with something caught between terror and pure rage, as he rushed to them, dropped to his knees and wrapped both Evelyn and Luca in his arms, crushing them to his chest as if afraid they would vanish if he let go, asking in a shaking voice whether they were hurt, his voice trembling for the first time Evelyn had ever heard the coldest Mafia boss in New York tremble, demanding answers, and Evelyn replied with equal tremor that they were fine, they were all right, and Dominic held them longer still, long enough for Evelyn to feel the wild pounding of his heart before he released them, stood, and turned to Bruno, who reported that the sniper was dead, having taken his own life before they could capture him, with no identification, no phone, nothing to trace back to the employer, a professional, and Dominic bared his teeth, saying there was no need to trace it because he knew exactly who had ordered it, and when he looked back at Evelyn and Luca, she saw something change in his eyes. Not merely the anger of a boss challenged, but the fury of a man who had almost lost those he loved. And that night Dominic moved Evelyn and Luca into the safe room in the basement, a steel and concrete bunker capable of withstanding bombs, and he did not leave, sitting in a chair by the door with a loaded gun in his hand, eyes fixed on the only entrance, saying Vincent wanted war, and he would have war, and he would lose, while Evelyn held Luca, sleeping fitfully in her arms, and watched Dominic in the dim light, realizing she was no longer afraid of him but afraid for him, because she knew that once Dominic Castellano decided to destroy someone, nothing in this world could stop him. The night inside the safe room stretched on without end, the pale yellow light washing over the windowless concrete space and making it feel both secure and suffocating at once, as Evelyn sat on the small bed set against the wall, with Luca curled in her arms yet unable to sleep, the child jerking awake again and again, whispering Mama in a trembling voice that forced her to sing softly, to stroke his hair, to murmur reassurances she herself was not sure were real, while Dominic remained seated in the chair by the door, back straight, eyes fixed on the thick steel entrance, one hand resting on the gun, not sleeping and not speaking, keeping watch in silence like a statue carved from stone, though Evelyn knew he was not as unfeeling as he appeared because she had seen the way he held them in the garden, had felt the wild hammering of his heart, had heard the tremor in his voice when he asked if they were hurt, and as the night deepened, Luca grew more restless, twisting and whimpering until he suddenly bolted upright with a scream, crying, "No, no, shooting, do not shoot, Mama." And Evelyn clutched him, tears streaming down her face as she whispered that she was here, that she was safe, that no one was shooting, that he was safe now. Yet Luca did not hear her, the nightmare having turned into a panic she did not know how to stop, a terror she recognized too well from her own past, from the nights after she lost her child when reality and dreams blurred together, and her heart broke to see her son trapped in the same darkness. And then Dominic stood, set the gun down on the chair, walked to the bed, and sat beside them. The first time since Evelyn had known him that he approached Luca not to command or inspect but simply to be close, hesitating for a second, before gently placing his large hand on the boy's back and rubbing small circles just as he had seen Evelyn do, calling Luca in a low gentle voice she had never heard from him before, saying, "Papa is here and Mama is here and no one can hurt you and Papa will protect you and Papa promises." And Luca stopped screaming, lifting his tear-filled brown eyes to look at Dominic as if seeing him for the first time. And then, in a tiny shaking voice, he said the word Dominic had waited nearly 3 years to hear. "Papa," and Evelyn felt her heart stop as she saw Dominic's dark eyes glisten under the light, not with anger and not with pain but with tears. And Luca said Papa again, clearer this time, reaching his small arms toward him and asking Papa hold. And Dominic did not hesitate, taking the child from Evelyn and pulling him close as Luca wrapped his arms around his neck and buried his face into his shoulder as though it were the safest place on earth. And Evelyn watched and began to cry, not from sorrow but because for the first time in her life she was seeing a family, her family, as Dominic sat there with one arm around Luca, while his other hand reached out almost unconsciously to take Evelyn's, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said, the grip of his hand warm and firm enough to say everything, and they remained that way for the rest of the night. Luca sleeping deeply in Dominic's arms, Evelyn resting her head against his shoulder, and Dominic staying awake to guard them both, no longer a mafia boss and a poor waitress, no longer a bargain or a performance, but simply a man, a woman, and a child they both loved with their whole hearts. A family not born in the usual way and shaped by tragedy and lies, yet a family all the same, and Evelyn knew with absolute certainty that she would do anything to protect this family. 1 week after the night in the safe room, Dominic hosted a gathering at the Castellano mansion itself. Not an ordinary party, but the public announcement of his engagement to Evelyn Harper, with invitations sent to every major mafia family in New York, to business allies, to the press, and to Manhattan high society, and a special invitation delivered personally to Vincent Castellano, bearing Dominic's handwritten note, saying he hoped his uncle would come and offer his blessing on this momentous day. Evelyn knew it was a trap. Dominic had explained the plan to her, that announcing the engagement and declaring Luca the sole heir would push Vincent into a corner, forcing him to act out of desperation and make a fatal mistake, and Evelyn hated the plan, hated using herself and Luca as bait, yet she understood it was the only way to end everything, to ensure Luca could live without the constant shadow of assassination. When the night of the gala arrived, the Castellano mansion blazed like a palace, hundreds of guests in glittering evening wear pouring in, champagne flowing like water, soft jazz drifting from a live band, and Evelyn stood beside Dominic in an ivory floor-length gown, her hair swept up and studded with diamonds, a 5-carat diamond engagement ring gleaming on her finger, its weight heavy not only in gold and stone but in meaning. Luca was kept upstairs with a nanny and 4 guards posted outside. Security tripled from the usual level with cameras everywhere and the most advanced alarm systems money could buy because Dominic would risk nothing when it came to his son. Vincent arrived late as always, wearing his practiced smile and offering hollow congratulations, shaking Dominic's hand, kissing Evelyn's cheek in the European manner, speaking pleasant words no one believed, and Evelyn met his gray eyes and saw the cold calculation beneath the warmth, knowing he was planning something, knowing Dominic knew it too. At 10 o'clock, Dominic led Evelyn onto a small stage, set up in the grand living room and tapped his glass for attention, the room falling silent as hundreds of eyes turned toward them, and Dominic thanked everyone for coming to witness an important moment in his life, saying many knew he had lived in darkness for the past nearly 3 years after Natalia's death. But tonight he wished to announce that he had found light again, that Evelyn Harper had agreed to become his wife, applause erupting as congratulations rang out while Evelyn forced a smile though her heart raced, glancing toward Vincent in the corner and seeing him on the phone with a tense expression before slipping quietly out of the room. Dominic then continued, his voice turning colder, announcing that his son Luca Castellano was the sole heir to the Castellano Empire, and that if anything were to happen to him, Evelyn would become Luca's legal guardian and manage all family assets until Luca reached adulthood, this being his will, notarized and legally binding as of that morning, a silence falling over the room as everyone grasped the meaning. Dominic having severed Vincent's last hope of controlling the empire, because even if Dominic died, even if something happened to Luca, power would never fall into the old uncle's hands. Evelyn searched the room for Vincent and could not find him, a chill racing down her spine as she whispered that Vincent was gone, Dominic replying that he knew and that Bruno was tracking him, and at that moment Bruno appeared at the doorway, his face as white as death, pushing through the crowd and racing to the stage to whisper something into Dominic's ear that made the mafia boss freeze. Evelyn, watching Dominic's face drain of color as his dark eyes ignited with a fury she had never seen. She asked what was wrong, her voice shaking, and Bruno choked out, his face pale with rage, that there was a traitor on the inside. The security system had not been hacked but manually disabled by one of the new guards, creating a blind spot just long enough for them to strike. All 4 loyal men watching Luca had been executed silently. The nanny was unconscious, and Luca had been taken. The world collapsed beneath Evelyn's feet, her scream tearing from her throat before she realized it was her own, crying out for her child without caring who heard, declaring that Vincent had taken her son, as Dominic drew his gun from inside his jacket in the middle of the crowded living room. Guests screaming and scattering in panic while Dominic did not care, grabbing Evelyn's hand and dragging her toward the exit as Bruno shouted for the car. Dominic roaring like a wounded beast that he would kill Vincent Castellano with his bare hands. And Evelyn said nothing as she ran, running as fast as she could with her heart shattering in her chest, praying they were not too late, praying Luca was still alive, praying she would not lose her child again. Dominic drove like a madman, his hands crushing the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His bloodshot eyes locked on the road ahead as the black Maserati tore through Manhattan streets at twice the legal speed, ignoring red lights and the screaming horns left behind. Bruno having traced Vincent's phone signal toward the old Castellano family estate at Montauk Point, the cliffside mansion overlooking the Atlantic where Dominic's father once dealt with traitors by throwing them into the sea from the terrace. And Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, gripping the door, her lips trembling as she whispered prayers she did not even know she was saying, begging God or anyone listening to protect her son, to not make her lose him again because she would not survive that loss a second time. And after what felt like an eternity, the car crashed through the iron gates of the abandoned estate, gravel screaming beneath the tires as it stopped at the front entrance, the house swallowed in darkness, except for a single flickering light on the rooftop, Dominic leaping out before the car fully stopped with his gun drawn and charging inside while Evelyn ran after him, ignoring the high heels shredding her feet and the long white dress tangling around her legs, because all she knew was that her son was somewhere in this house and she had to save him, racing through dust-filled rooms and up rotting wooden stairs, guided by Luca's cries echoing down from above like needles stabbing into her heart and driving her onward despite her lungs burning, until they burst onto the rooftop where Vincent stood at the edge with his back to a drop of 50 meters onto jagged rocks and black waves, Luca clutched in one hand by the collar like a helpless kitten, while the other hand held a gun pressed to the child's head, Vincent screaming for them to stop, threatening to throw the boy into the abyss if they came any closer, Dominic freezing with his gun raised but unable to fire because the distance was too close and one wrong move would kill Luca, telling Vincent to let the boy go, and that this was between the two of them, that the child was innocent, only for Vincent to laugh like a madman and snarl that the boy was living proof of a crime he had hidden for 3 years, the thing that would drag him to hell, turning his venom on Evelyn and mocking her as a poor girl from Queens, boasting that he had stolen her child once and would do it again forever. And in that moment something ignited inside Evelyn, not fear and not despair, but the raw, uncontrollable fury of a mother, the most primal force in existence, as she saw Vincent's attention fixed on Dominic and the gun slip a fraction away from Luca's head, saw her chance and took it, launching herself forward with a speed born of desperation and love, crashing into Vincent and tearing Luca from his grip as a gunshot exploded, the bullet ripping past her shoulder and shredding white fabric into a streak of red, pain not even registering as she wrapped Luca to her chest and rolled away from the edge, Vincent stumbling back from the impact, reaching for the railing only for the rotten wood to splinter beneath him, and in a frozen instant, Evelyn saw his face twist from rage to panic to pure terror as he fell, his scream slicing through the night before, vanishing, with the sound of his body smashing against the rocks below, leaving Evelyn on the rooftop, clutching Luca as they both sobbed, her shoulder burning but meaningless because her son was alive. The only thing that mattered. Dominic rushing to them and dropping to his knees, pulling both of them into his arms as if afraid they would disappear, his voice breaking completely as he asked if they were hurt, and Evelyn whispered against his chest that they were safe now, Luca lifting his tear-filled eyes from his mother to Dominic and back again before speaking softly but clearly, calling them family, Mama, Papa, my family, and Dominic cried, and Evelyn cried as Luca clung to them both, a child who had finally found where he belonged. 6 months had passed since the night of terror on the rooftop of the Montauk estate, 6 months for the wound on Evelyn's shoulder to heal, for Luca's nightmares to slowly fade, and for the Castellano mansion to transform from a dark fortress into a home filled with laughter, the heavy black velvet curtains replaced by soft white drapes that let sunlight pour into every room. Fresh flowers placed everywhere, because Evelyn loved flowers, and Dominic had learned to love the things she loved, and the wedding was held on a spring afternoon in the garden behind the mansion, the very place where 6 months earlier Evelyn had nearly lost her life to a sniper's bullet. A different location suggested by Dominic, but firmly refused by Evelyn because she wanted to create new memories, beautiful memories, to overwrite the shadows of the past, with no press, no politicians, no polished faces of high society, only the people closest to them, the ones who had stood by them in their darkest days. Bruno serving as best man, despite looking awkward in his suit and constantly tugging at his collar as if it were choking him. Dr. Margaret Chen sitting in the front row with tears of happiness in her eyes. Evelyn walking down the aisle of white flowers in a simple wedding dress with no long train or ornate embellishments, wearing only a pearl necklace Dominic said had belonged to his mother, the last piece of jewelry she left behind before she died, Evelyn having no one to give her away because she had no father. Yet she was not alone, because beside her was Luca, 3 years old, dressed in a tiny suit identical to Dominic's, holding a red velvet pillow with the wedding rings, and babbling excitedly to his mother about a butterfly he had just seen in the bushes. Dominic waiting at the end of the aisle, and as Evelyn drew closer, she saw his dark eyes shining in a way she had never seen before. No longer the terrifying shadow over New York, but a man in love, a devoted father, and in moments, her husband. And when the priest asked Dominic if he took Evelyn to be his wife, he did not say "I do" in the usual way, but answered in a deep, steady voice that it would be until his last breath and all the breaths after that. And when the priest asked Evelyn, she looked at Dominic, looked at Luca standing between them with a wide grin, and said she had agreed from the moment her son called her mother. And on their wedding night, after Luca had fallen fast asleep in the next room, clutching the old teddy bear he refused to give up, Dominic and Evelyn stood on the balcony overlooking the glittering lights of New York City as the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and new beginnings. Evelyn whispering that sometimes she still could not believe this was real, that 3 years earlier she had wanted to die and thought her life was over. Dominic asking softly, "What about now?" as his arm tightened around her waist, and she answered with shining eyes that now she had everything she had ever dreamed of. A family, a home, a man who loved her and her child. Dominic kissing her forehead gently and telling her that she had saved them, that she had saved Luca and saved him, and that he did not know who he would have become without her. Evelyn shaking her head and saying no, they had saved each other. And from the next room, Luca's sleepy but happy voice calling out, "Mama, Papa, I cannot sleep. Tell me a story." Dominic and Evelyn smiling at each other and going into Luca's room, lying down on either side of him on the small bed, as Evelyn began to tell a story about a boy who did not speak a single word, until one day he met someone, and instantly knew she was his mother. Luca interrupting with bright eyes to say that story was about him. Evelyn kissing his forehead and saying yes, it was about him, and that the boy, his mother, and his father lived happily ever after. Luca yawning and asking how long forever was. Dominic answering in a warm, steady voice that forever meant, as long as you need your parents, we are here. When you grow up and have your own family, we still love you, and even when we are no longer in this world, we will still watch over you from above. That is forever. Luca smiling and falling asleep mid-story. Dominic and Evelyn lying there watching their son breathe evenly and knowing that at last, after all the suffering, loss, betrayal, and danger, they had found each other, that they were a family, and that this was the story of Dominic, Evelyn, and little Luca, a story that reminds us that sometimes blood does not make a family. Love does, that no matter how long the darkness lasts, the light will come if we do not give up, and that there is nothing more dangerous in this world than a mother fighting for her child. And how do you feel about this story? Was there a moment that made your heart tremble? Was there a detail that reminded you of your own life? Please share your feelings in the comments below, because we truly want to hear the thoughts from deep in your hearts. And if this story touched your emotions, please like it, share this video with your loved ones, and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss more heartfelt stories every day. Wishing all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. Thank you for accompanying us. Goodbye and see you again in the next video.